So the intro there, Greg said we'll look to next season in a moment, but I just want to go back to last season and compare it to this season, because the reaction at the end of the game on Sunday didn't seem as joyous as it did a year before when they stayed up. There was more anger this time.
That's right. It was nowhere near as joyous. It was the brief bit of relief just to get it done. There was inevitably a pitch invasion. I think sometimes that kind of all of a sudden that tension and nearly 100 minutes of just agony ending, there's just a release, and unfortunately that's how it came about. But joy or happiness was very short-lived. It did very quickly turn to anger, and anger has been a key part of how the fans have felt for months now. But at various times they've put it aside to get behind the team and to try and sort of generate a positive energy around the players and the manager. And when it was all over, you're right, it was chance of sack the board, I think, within about 5 minutes of their last whistle. So, it wasn't not quite the sort of unadulterated delight. And there were lots of differences as well from the Crystal Palace game last season. But one being that it went absolutely to the wire. If you remember, it took them a game but one last season.
Yeah.
So although they're very, very close, they did kind of have that comfort blanket, if you like, of going away to Arsenal on the last day. And this time it was all or bust on that final game. And as ever, they made everyone sweat.
I thought, as well as the fans, Patrick, I actually thought those involved, whether that be players or Sean Dyche, were very sort of, maybe I'd go as far as saying downbeat, but certainly just more realistic. They didn't seem in interviews afterwards that much. There wasn't that much of a celebratory nature in the interviews either.
No, I think you're spot on there. I looked at some of the interviews Jordan Pickford and Connor Cody did, and they were talking about how they can't let this happen again. And that's collectively, as a unit, as a club, they can't allow this to happen again. And I suppose that's the concern here for players, supporters, everybody associated with Everton, is that this is the second successive season they've done this. I think, as we mentioned in our piece on the season as a whole, they've almost become a perennial relegation candidate. They're a club now you expect to be embroiled in that dogfight come the start of every season. And it's not like the finance has been there or is there to completely catapult them out of that danger and away from that danger. Dare I say, even if they did have that money, I wouldn't necessarily just assume they would spend it wisely anyway. That one of the main lessons from the very early days under the majority shareholder Farhad Moshiri was that Everton did not spend money wisely. So there was kind of that was the tone after the game. And I think it was also quite telling that Sean Dyche gave a very long press conference afterwards where he spoke about realism, where he spoke about the need to go back to basics, to get back. I think he called Everton an earthy club in the past and almost seemed to suggest that it had lost direction. Now, that's something a lot of people that have covered Everton or have watched Everton over this period would agree with and associate with, because I think there is a general sense that the club has gone in the wrong direction and has kind of been rudderless now. So what you've seen on the pitch is almost a direct result of what's happened off it over the last 4 or 5 years. Vision very quickly becomes muddled and muddied. That's been the case at Everton. They've, as I say, the ownership have often decided, the managers, not the sporting directors. The ownership, even in January, were trying to sign players that people at Finch Farm at the training ground didn't think Everton could or should sign. And not just that's a football club that's not on the same page.
When you say ownership, are we basically talking Moshiri? I mean, you may not be able to answer that, but I know the whole board have got abuse and stick and so on and so forth, and the Everton fans want the board out. But when we talk ownership, are we talking Moshiri?
Yeah, I think it's important to make that distinction between the ownership and the rest of the hierarchy. So you have Farhad Moshiri there as the majority shareholder. And when I say ownership, I mean that he is making a lot of the big calls. So when Rafa Benitez came in, that was an ownership pick. To be fair, when Frank Lampard came in, that was we were told that was more of a board pick. So the board there, that's the chairman, Bill Kenwright, the CEO at the moment, Denise Barrett Baxendale, and that's the distinction. But I would go as far to say that everybody at that level whether it be the owner or the board, has played a role in this because the division's been muddied. I mean, are Everton, as we were saying earlier, are they the kind of the people's club from North Liverpool who give back to the local community and the earthy and the kind of dogs of war? Or are they the Hollywood team of James Rodriguez, admittedly faded stars, but James Rodriguez and Carlo Ancelotti? That's on the ownership in the main, but also the board of directors too, to establish.
The final line in the big read on The Athletic on Everton says the desire to see evidence that things can change will only grow stronger. Given all the various things that we talked about and the position that they find themselves in, at this stage, how can they change, Greg?
Well, I think what the fans are calling for more strongly than anything is a change at boardroom level. So they believe that the chairman, Bill Kenwright, and the CEO, Denise Barrett-Baxendale, primarily those two, have effectively under-delivered now for a long time, and that it's time for new faces, new ideas, and people who can come in and try and move the club from what they feel is like, kind of seasons upon seasons of mediocrity, interspersed with genuine threat of losing its Premier League status. So that's what they want. And the potential for that to happen via a new investment, we understand if it is MSP, the likelihood is they would want their own representation at board level. Excuse me. And it does feel like there's a genuine prospect of that now. It does feel like change in that regard is afoot. Paddy and I are waiting, kind of in these weeks and before the pre-season begins. And, I think as soon as the prospect investment arrives, we will see a very different Everton emerge. And, whether that will be the answer to all their woes, remains to be seen. But as we say in the piece, what can't go on is the dysfunction between the sort of two club Everton, almost an Everton built around sort of the Liver buildings in Merseyside, where their administrative HQ is, and the CEO, and Bill Kenwright affiliated with that, albeit in London, and then the London of the owner, Fard Mashiri, the Everton, I should say, of the owner, Fard Mashiri, in London, in Monaco, wherever he is. And often there's a disconnect between those two camps, and the communication isn't good enough. And that's leading to some of the bizarre failures in recruitment in many other areas of the club, and it's probably a big reason why they're in this mess.
A new board, though, would have to tell the ownership to back off, wouldn't they?
Yeah, a new board would have to come in and perhaps be more robust, perhaps kind of find different ways of managing that schism. It might be that the new board comes in and it's completely, to use Sean Dyche's favourite word, aligned with Fard Mashiri. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think the fans are as angry at Mashiri's handling of the club as the boards. Neither has come out of this with much credit, but at least there would be a cohesive strand there running the club from the top. It's when you've got these two groups pulling in different directions, all got different opinions on everything from manager searches to who should be the director of football to what players should be signed, what agents should be used. It's just completely toxic, really. That's the stage it's reached for Everton. So you're right, it's not easy fundamentally to tell someone who's the 90+% majority investor to be quiet and stay in his box. I don't think that's realistic from any board, but surely a better functioning board can manage that situation better than the current one have.
Well, you're also there as a board of directors. You're there at the behest of the owner. Ultimately, you sit below him in the hierarchy of the football club. So you can have ideas and thoughts on what needs to happen at the football club. I'm sure you can tell the owner, as he has been told, to maybe back off a little bit and leave football to footballing people. But if he's the one putting in all the money, if he's the one making all the appointments, including at boardroom level, then ultimately he's the one that's going to end up with the final say. So I don't think it's purely as simple as kind of removing a board and putting in one that kind of Mashiri's happy with and more aligned with, if you want to use that kind of Sean Dyche expression, alignment again. I think it that would also raise questions as to whether Mashiri was fit and the right man, I suppose, to kick this project on, there's a lot of evidence that puts that in doubt too. What Everton need is a strong leadership. They need people challenging kind of regressive views and kind of regressive kind of methods and ways of doing things. And
is
then
Sean Dyche, is this under Sean Dyche at a team level? Because actually, there'll be a lot of people who may be surprised by this. There may not be if they've heard us interview Sean Dyche before. But Sean Dyche is a very progressive manager. You only have to look at what he put in place at Burnley and their training ground facilities and so on and so forth. So actually, if you want progressive rather than regressive, you probably start with Sean Dyche as your first team manager.
Yeah, I also think it would help Everton to have a presence like Sean Dyche, that strong presence, who is not scared to speak truth to power and might say, well, look, this is ludicrous, this idea of kind of what you want to do in the transfer market or whatever else. Again, that goes back to what some of the stuff he was saying after the game, where he was talking about realism if things aren't right. The other thing here is that for too long, Everton have gone from one manager to another and one playing style to another. And I think even with Lampard, part of the reason he got more time was because there was a sense inside the club that they needed some stability. They needed somebody to build over the course of 2-3 years, get a blueprint in place, get a way of playing, get a squad that is suited to those methods. And they've not been able to do that because there's been such regular change and flux. So kind of the success of Dyche is fundamental now, because he's the one that doesn't have vast sums of money, is going to need to manage upwards with the owner and the board, whoever they may be. And he's also going to have to make sure that on the pitch, Everton move clear of relegation at a fundamental period when they're building a new stadium.